Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 20th day of January now, 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show once again. Up first hazardous weather graphic, the showing hazardous weather, the first of three here, starting up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. That's a winter storm watch for Friday night and Saturday. The time frame there that's out, that's for winds gusting to 40 miles an hour, blowing snow, wind chills 55 degrees below zero, and again that kicks into effect Friday night through Saturday, and that'll create of course possible visibilities down to less than a quarter mile at times. And then the red area there, the Alaska Range, that's a high wind warning out for let's see, that kicks into effect for tomorrow and tomorrow night for winds gusting to 75 miles an hour, actually sustained 35 to 50 miles an hour, gusts 75 miles an hour through the passes of the Alaska Range there. Again, high wind warning out for that area for Friday afternoon and Friday night. And then the Copper River Basin winter storm watch out for Friday and Friday night. That's for freezing rain, could be possibly a quarter inch, especially over toward McCarthy. Could be a quarter inch of ice glaze there with possible freezing rain. Just a winter storm watch now. May or may not occur, but there is definitely the possibility that could occur. And then for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, there's a flood watch out for tonight through Saturday evening, looking for 4 to 6 inches of rain to move in there. So snowfall levels coming up possibly as high as 3,500 feet. So with the snow melt and the 4 to 6 inch rainfall expected, could be some flooding possibly, just to watch at this point in time, not quite a warning yet. Otherwise, central or the eastern interior there, north of the Alaska Range, with the exception of the greater Fairbanks area, the greater Fairbanks area, winter weather advisory is out for tonight and tomorrow for winds gusting to 45 miles an hour with blowing snow, reducing visibilities to less than a half mile at times in those areas, especially over the higher terrain and along the Steese Highway. Western Arctic coast, same sort of thing, winter weather advisory out tonight and tomorrow for blowing snow, visibilities down to less than a quarter mile or half mile at times. Same thing for the Noatak Valley and the northwest coast with those winds. And also for the Seward Peninsula, Shishmaref along the western Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait coast on down to St. Lawrence Island, winter weather advisory tonight into Saturday. For the same sort of conditions there, winds 40 to 50 miles an hour with visibilities and blowing snow reduced to half mile or less at times. And for Bristol Bay, that's a winter weather advisory out, for tonight. Possibly 6 inches of snow falling with winds gusting 35 miles an hour. That'll create some blowing and drifting snow there as well. And that about wraps it up for the hazardous weather. So moving on, satellite imagery, you can see a pretty good low pressure area moving northward, starting to fall apart there. As you can see, it crosses the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, but brought some pretty good winds to the area there. Nikolsky had a peak wind gust of 60 miles an hour, while St. Paul Island had a peak wind gust of 47 miles an hour out of the northeast. Those northeast winds continue to pull cold air southward down to around 10 degrees above zero at St. Paul throughout the late morning and early afternoon hours today. And on Alaska, peak wind gust 46 miles an hour there, with the low center tracking almost right over the top of Unalaska Island. And gusty winds, the front stretching out to the east there, seeing rain about a third of an inch, nothing too heavy on the rainfall. Kodiak Island, Kodiak State Airport picking up about a third of an inch of precipitation in the last 12 hours. Winds gusting up out of the east to about 35, 36 miles an hour with Temperature in the upper 30s. On the chart here, you can see that tightening gradient there in the warmer air with the rain, Kodiak Island pushing up toward the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. Not heavy amounts over the Panhandle today, maybe 1 to 2/10 of an inch. That's about it, mainly over the central and southern areas, lighter amounts to the north. And gusty winds over the interior, Indian Mountain, Utopia Creek, seeing gusts about 35 miles an hour. So the higher terrain in the central interior there where the lines are closest together south of the Brooks Range, along the upper Yukon River areas on out to the western Arctic coast. Seen some 20 gusts, 35 mile an hour winds there. Areas of light snow, kind of a widespread area of light snow, anywhere from a ½ inch to maybe 1 to 2 inches, like around Galena, picking that up on down into the northern Bristol Bay, southern Kuskokwim Valley, and then the snow and strong northeast winds over the Pribilof Islands, and then rain, about 1 to 3/10 of an inch falling over the eastern Aleutians. Nothing too terribly heavy at this point yet as far as precipitation goes, more of a wind producer. But tonight, that low, another low, the original low that's moved already across the Alaska Peninsula, weakens out into a trough there along the west coast with areas of light snow. That band of snow actually linking up with the one that's already there, and that begins to shift westward into the eastern Bering, but lingers along the Yukon Delta coast, Nunivak Island, up across Norton Sound of the Seward Peninsula. Snow and blowing snow continuing there, and then the strong winds with the blowing snow over the northwest part of the state, western Brooks Range along mountains, and rain continues. Rain heavy at times, possibly Kodiak Island, with gusty winds maybe up to 45 miles an hour, rain and wind, and temperatures on the increase here from the North Gulf Coast, across all of southern Alaska, and into the Panhandle. Warm front rain spreading into the area. Another low forms, pulls northward there, 966 millibars toward the Alaska Peninsula. That one will go a little bit farther to the north, we'll see tomorrow. Actually pulls back to the west a little bit. But generally, you can see the frontal boundary pushes northward. That'll bring much warmer temperatures in across all of southern Alaska, with the freezing rain moving into the Copper River Basin. Rain heavy at times, especially on the north coast of the Panhandle. Inland areas there, central and northern Panhandle, again, possibly to about Yakutat, could pick up 4 to 6 inches of rain with melting snow at the lower elevations, possible flooding, as I mentioned there. Stays windy over the central and northwest interior areas, dry and chilly, but even up there temperatures begin to start warming up. And Pribilof Islands, another day of the snow blowing snow conditions there, with the front just to your east, and warmer temperatures along and behind that will start working in probably Friday night and Saturday as the whole mass of cold air and the northerly winds start to shift westward. And looking at the Saturday outlook, that actually turns westerly on the winds, west-southwest. Snow showers into the Pribilofs, light snow showers, warmer temperatures, with rain and snow showers, or mixed rain and snow showers, pretty light and scattered, actually isolated over the eastern Aleutians. Probably a dry day for Alaska, maybe the western Alaska Peninsula there. Break before the next system rolls on up to the north there. The original low pulling northward, weakening pretty rapidly and setting up over St. Lawrence Island. Periods of light snow there, but light winds. And lighter winds over the northwest interior, and a much quieter weather pattern setting up even from southern Alaska, Copper River Basin area, dry over the eastern interior. Actually from the Copper River Basin up across the entire eastern part of the state to the north slope, Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, looking dry. Periods of rain, weakening trough there, keeps it wet and unsettled over the Panhandle and the North Gulf Coast, but definitely warmer temperatures spreading even into the central interior of the state. And looking at lows tonight, from 25 to 40 below from the north slope out to the Arctic coast, and below zero, 0 to 5 below for the central interior, single numbers along the Alaska Range, mid-20s to lower 30s southern Alaska, and mid-30s for Kodiak Island, mid to upper 30s for the lows for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And look for the temperature to start to rise there. By tomorrow morning, should be back up to 15 for St. Paul, and in the 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle for your lows. Highs tomorrow, 40 to 50 for the highs for the southeast coast. Lower 40s, Homer, Seldovia, mid-30s all the way up to Anchorage and Palmer, and lower 30s into the Susitna Valley, mid-20s Copper River Basin, above zero all the way up into the Koyukuk Valley, but Fort Yukon holding at 3 below, and 10 to 20 below for your highs for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Otherwise, above zero for the Seward Peninsula to Kotzebue, back above zero, but looking for an afternoon high of 3 below for St. Lawrence Island, and trying to push 20 there for the Pribilofs. Otherwise, highs right around the frost point there for the central western Aleutians, upper 30s for the Fox Islands, to near 40 over the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Lows Saturday morning, anywhere from 15 to 25 below now for the North Slope out to the Arctic coast, but above zero south of the Brooks Range, exception maybe the Yukon Flats. Otherwise, looking for a low of 5 to 15 for the central interior into the Tanana Valley, and lows in the lower 30s, southern Alaska, to upper 30s for Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, Homer, Seward, upper 30s for your lows, and upper 30s to mid 40s for the lows in the Panhandle, warmest along the coast. Lows near 40 for the Alaska Peninsula. Still a little chilly out over the central western Aleutians. And then highs stuck at 20 there for the Pribilofs, near zero St. Lawrence Island, but highs upper 30s to lower 40s south central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather. A little bit of marginal VFR over the central North Slope, otherwise some good VFR from the Arctic coast right on down to the Alaska Range into the Copper River Basin. IFR in Norton Sound, southern Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. Bigger batch there from the Yukon Delta coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, Nunivak Island, Pribilofs down to Atka, eastward into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, all of the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, Friday afternoon, we've got IFR still socked in over the southeast coast, all on the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, most of Cook Inlet, some VFR, northern Cook Inlet, and possibly Kinnick Arm, but a good portion of this Susitna Valley will be IFR, especially over toward the eastern and southern slopes of the central and western Alaska Range. IFR, upper Yukon Valley, Yukon Flats area down to the White Mountains. Marginal VFR over much of the southern two-thirds of the state with good IFR. Eastern Bering Sea from the Bering Strait all the way down to the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula becoming VFR from Atka on out to Shimia. Not much change Saturday morning. Still a lot of IFR, Eastern Bering Sea into the southwest interior, actually all the way across the Kuskokwim Valley to the Alaska Range, and some lingering IFR western Cook Inlet down to Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, Panhandle still socked in with IFR, and some areas of VFR over the eastern interior with a zone of IFR along the mid and upper Yukon River Valley to the southeastern Brooks Range. Marginal VFR, central North Slope. That expands a little bit to the Arctic coast there for the marginal VFR. Otherwise, IFR, southern Seward Peninsula down to Bristol Bay, and the Pribilofs with IFR also, Prince William Sound, southern Copper River Basin, eastern Gulf of Alaska, all of the Panhandle. Anatuvag, VFR for the day Friday, same forecast for Adigan, good VFR flying, either approach. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, lowest conditions on the eastern entrance of both passes. Rainy, IFR, again, lowest conditions on the eastern entrance, a little better on the west side. Windy, starting out good, but look for deterioration conditions throughout the day. That same trend also for Isabel. VFR trending toward IFR throughout the day. And Mintesta, VFR, but only going toward marginal in the afternoon. Tanita, VFR to IFR, downward trend the entire day Friday. Portage, IFR may develop into low IFR, especially on the eastern entrance during the afternoon Friday. Chilkoot and White, socked in IFR for a couple of days. And for the freezing levels at the surface, just north of the Aleutians, up across Bristol Bay, North Gulf Coast, bisecting the Panhandle to the southeast. Otherwise, 2,000 to 8,000 feet across the Gulf of Alaska. And from there, looking at icing. Considerable moderate rime icing up to the North Gulf Coast with a slug of moisture moving into the Panhandle, eastern North Gulf Coast areas. Also, Shelikof Strait, the east side of the Aleutian Range there, and maybe the southwest mountains, heavier icing. And from there, looking at the jet stream. Upper level low pressure backing west-southwest to the west-central Bering Sea, and a low tracking northward across Bristol Bay. So we've got southwest flow 150 knots pulling warm air northward into the North Gulf Coast. Ridging tries to build in over the southern panhandle, but not quite doing much of a job there. Otherwise, 75 to 85 knot southwest winds into the southeast coast. Southwest 70 knots, Shelikof Strait, right on up across Cook Inlet into the southeast interior. And for 3,000 feet, we've got easterly winds 45 to 65 knots cutting across the Seward Peninsula, the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. Another band of pretty good easterlies up to 60 knots there across the north slope from the eastern Arctic coast out toward Point Ley down to Cape Lisburne. And southwest 60 knots across Kodiak Island, 35 to 40 knot winds for the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle, north 40 knots for the eastern Aleutians and the Pribilofs. Turbulence widespread, considerable moderate yaw, especially for small aircraft below 4,000 to 6,000 feet from the eastern interior. Along and south of the Brooks Range, upper Yukon Valley, Koyukuk, Kobuk Valleys, right on out to the northwest coast, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. Looks pretty bumpy for the entire southeast coast tomorrow, as well as Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Susitna, Manuska Valley, down to Kodiak Island, the Aleutian Range, into the southern Kuskokwim Valley.
Howdy Starshines, Trace here. Learning the stars is a big part of sky watching, and the best way to learn something new is to build on what you already know, and we call that star hopping. Face north around 8:30 to find something easy, the Big Dipper, part of the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Now start your star hopping. Connect the dots of the two stars at the end of the Dipper's spoon and continue that line up and to the right. You'll run into the star of similar brightness, that's Polaris, aka the North Star. The North Star marks the end of the much fainter Little Dipper. Now make another hop and you'll come to a star in the W-shaped constellation Cassiopeia, the Queen, and one more hop brings you to the corner of a giant square of stars marking Pegasus, the Flying Horse. Add these to your sky knowledge so we can hop some more and keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft. No. Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And So the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. It's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
It's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Thinner ice still advancing in toward the northeast shore of St. Paul Island, but those northerly winds are expected to diminish markedly here over the next 24 hours as that band of northerlies pulls westward and may even start to develop a southerly wind over the southeast Bering Sea about Saturday and into the weekend. So moving on to coastal water forecasts for the southeast coast tomorrow, gale warnings on the south coast, south winds 35 knots, small craft advisories for the central and north coast, west winds 25 to 30 knots with seas 15 to 17 feet. Inside waters, 20-knot winds from the south expected for Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage southeast of 20 knots with 4-foot seas, both locations. Clarence Strait, south winds 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Outlook for Sunday, or going to Friday for Prince William Sound tomorrow. Small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast, east-southeast winds 35 knots with seas under 20 feet. Southeast 45-knot winds for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, pretty strong northeast winds there at 45 knots sustained, seas 15 feet. Good gales for Southern Cook Inlet, northeast 40 knots, seas 9 feet. Small craft brisk wind advisories, Northern Cook Inlet, north winds at 30 knots. And for Saturday, southeast winds 25 knots for Cook Inlet, seas and ice-free waters to 6 feet. Small craft advisories also for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Both locations looking at southeast winds at 30 knots for the first day of the weekend. North Gulf Coast, south winds 25 knots. And Prince William Sound, southeast winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, east to south winds 35 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south winds 20 to 30 knots. And for Bristol Bay, east winds 25 knots. Outlook for Saturday, Kodiak Island, south winds 30 to 35 knots. Gales along the eastern part of the island, Fognak Island. And from Sitkinak to Castle Cape, southeast winds 35 knots. And the Alaska Peninsula Pacific side, winds will be south of 30 knots with seas at 20 feet. Southwest 25-knot winds with seas only 6 feet in the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Small craft advisories for Bristol Bay, winds east 25 knots. And for the Fox Islands, gale warnings, north to northeast winds, 35 knots, seas as high as 20 feet. North winds 30 to 35 knots for Adak and Atka with seas 15 to 20 feet. And small craft advisories for Amchitka Island. North winds 25 knots and just 20 knot winds from Kiska to Shimia from the north. Those diminish even further on Saturday. North winds 15 knots from Shimia to Amchitka Island. Adak and Atka, lighter winds in store for those areas as well. North 20 to 25 knots, seas subsiding to 11 to 12 feet. Small craft advisories for the eastern Aleutians. Northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest across Unalaska Island. Seas as high as 16 feet. Southwest coast, north to northeast winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for the Pribilofs, north winds 35 knots. North winds 30 knots from the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, right on up to the Bering Strait. And for Saturday, brisk wind advisory, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots. For the southwest coast, west winds at 20 knots. And for the St. Matthew Island area, marine area, northwest winds at 25 knots. Pribilofs, north winds at 20 with 8-foot seas. Up along the eastern Boulevard Sea coast, brisk wind advisories, east-northeasterlies, 25 knots, northeast at 20 on the central coast, then back up to 25 knots from the east for the western Arctic coast. Gale warnings from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, northeast winds 35 knots, and 30-knot northerly winds from Wells to Cape Thompson. Those come down to 20 knots in that area on Saturday. The brisk wind advisories continue for the central and western Arctic coast, east-northeast winds at 30 knots. Gale warnings now for the eastern Boulevard Sea coast, winds coming up out of the east, 35 to 40 knots. For tonight, strong frontal system and a big push of warm air and moisture coming up to the North Gulf Coast, and clouds spread over all of southern Alaska from south to north or to the northwest as that band of snow shifts along the coast and over the eastern Bering Sea. It stays cold with snow and blowing snow for the Pribilofs, to a lesser extent St. Lawrence Island. And rain for the Panhandle on Friday. Rain and snow push in, and much warmer temperatures into southern Alaska during the day, and especially the afternoon on Friday. It stays colder and drier up over the north and northeast interior. Snow and blowing snow western Arctic coast of the Seward Peninsula. And on Saturday, quieter weather pattern with warmer temperatures over much of central and southern Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go fly. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.